Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today for this digital analytics program learning series, part 2 of A/B testing with our friends from the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. My name's Tim Loudon. I'm the program manager for what we affectionately call DAP. I am joined today by a host of friends that are helping out in the production of this webinar, Alex and Lauren and Jeremy from our DGU team, as well as John and Jen from CFPB. And today we are very excited to bring you part 2 of our 2-part series. Part 1 was last week on A/B testing. If you missed part 1, fear not, we have it available on video for you in our YouTube channel, and you will receive that link in a follow-up email after this webinar. Also included in that email will be a link to a satisfaction survey, which will take you a whopping 30 seconds to fill out, and we do request that you fill out for us because it helps us make sure we're delivering content that is valuable to you, as well as a bunch of other resources for DAP, and the email address if you'd like to sign up for the A/B testing community that the fine folks who are joining us on this webinar help manage. What else should I talk about? I mentioned that part 1 is on video. Part 2 will also be recorded, so in case you miss anything, you can always go to that YouTube channel to review it. And we will also be attaching the slides, so you don't need to take furious notes. With that, I think I can kick it over and we can get started. We're joined today by Jen Wingerberg, who is a web analytics specialist from CFPB, as well as another of her colleagues, John Rubin, and they are going to show us exactly how CFPB is using A/B testing on their sites to improve user experience and gain more knowledge about the users. So I'll kick it off to you, Jen.
Awesome, thanks, Tim. Again, this is A/B Testing 102, which is our follow-up presentation from A/B Testing 101, which my colleague Kelly Holden presented last week. My name is Jennifer Wingerberg, or Jen. I am part of the digital analytics team here at CFPB, and with me I have a colleague that I work a lot with, John Rubin, who's part of our user experience team. So we will be going over A/B Testing 202. What is involved in today's presentation? We're going to talk a little bit about, or give a recap of what Kelly talked about last week in A/B Testing 101. We'll also share some examples of the tests that we've run here at CFPB. We'll go through our process that we have established at CFPB, as well as talk a little bit about what we do after testing, or after the A/B testing. John will also go over a little bit about what AA testing is. And finally, we're going to finish the presentation off with a little discussion about limits to A/B testing. So with all of that said, I will hand it off to John, who's going to give us a little recap.
Thanks very much, Jen. Hi, everybody. Previously on A/B Testing 101, we talked a lot about how A/B testing has been part of the big data wave that's been happening over the past 10 years or so, and probably in the last 5 years, A/B testing has been getting larger and larger. I've been reading about it in places like Harvard Business Review, touted as a really great way to use big data to solve lots of complex problems. And basically, A/B testing is an analytics-driven method, which we'll get into lots more detail on, but it's a continuous optimization method. It's not something that you do once. It's really looking to create great innovation and great design through incremental changes over a period of time. So do it again and again, iterate, rinse, repeat. So what is A/B testing? It's basically you have 2 different designs and you show those to an audience, but the audience is not aware that they're being split into these 2 groups. So right now, 100% of everybody who looks at your website is looking at one design. But in this case, you can have 2 different designs that you're testing out. One, as you can see, has the smaller black box here, a larger box here, buttons are in different places. So 50% or whatever percent you choose of the audience will be receiving this version, 50% will be seeing the other version, and you sit back and watch the results roll in and pay attention to certain characteristics and certain metrics that you're tracking and see which one works best. And in this particular case, test option B had a higher conversion rate for this button, so we know that this is a better choice than option A. Nice and simple. So here's an example of it in the real world. SimCity, which is a great classic game back in the day. Maybe it's still good today, I'm not sure. 2 versions that they were testing. On the left-hand side here, they have a nice big ad at the top. And then on the right-hand side, they did not. And they wanted to see, well, can we drive people? Will this ad work successfully in getting people to order more copies of the game. So they ran them both in an A/B test. People didn't realize they were being part of a test. They just went to the site. Half the people saw this, half the people saw this. What happened? Boom, the non-ad version worked a lot better. And that's not surprising, although it may stress out some marketing people to learn that. So this particular case, less ads worked better, and we have the data to prove it. If you think about the types of methods that there are to learn about designs and research, you have this nice little crosshatch here of, on the left-hand side, many participants, and on the right-hand, few for quant and qual. Then looking at actual behavior here, and then looking at what people say here. A/B testing is up here in the top left. It has many, many participants, similar to analytics type work, and you're being able to watch what people do, but not really understand the why and what people do. And other types of user research that you may be familiar with, such as usability testing and interviews, are on different parts of the spectrum, but this is very, very much a quantitative and analytics-based approach. So what are the benefits of doing A/B testing? Helps you make data-informed decisions. And we like to say data-informed more than data-driven because it's just one data point that helps you in your decision-making process. It helps give you confidence to make changes. In the government sector, changes to government sites are not always related to dollars and cents, but it's still about retention of users. And there's always risk involved in making those changes. So making you feel better about those moves. And it allows you to do these types of experimentation, but with minimal risk. And we'll get into more detail about that later. It gives you information about your users and what behaviors that they're undertaking. But the part I like best is it promotes a culture of research and experimentation at your organization. This is really important and shouldn't be understated. The ability to try out different things and be willing to try things and experiment and put out things that aren't 100% finished and assume and be aware that we don't know all the answers is a really important part of the healthy organization and one that can innovate and create products of value. So it helps center you on what's important. Some best practices that we found out by doing tests over the past few years. Have a clear hypothesis and a goal. Don't just run the test because you can run it. Really have an idea for what success looks like and try and understand why people are acting in a certain way. Having high traffic is key. Sorry to say, if you have a page with just 100 or less views per month, you're just not going to be able to run an A/B test on it. I think our minimum are certainly in the thousands and sometimes in the tens of thousands of monthlies. Monthlies or annual?
Monthly.
Monthlies, okay, great. Definitely allow enough time to run a test. We set a limit for ourselves for at least 2 weeks. And even if you see results that look fantastic after a day or even some hours, don't follow the temptation to stop the test early, give it time. Also, don't expect a clear winner. It's an experiment. It can go in any direction, and you will learn something from no matter what it shows, but be prepared to be surprised. Try and limit your experimentation to just testing one variant at a time, and that goes for the designs and also the number of different types of things inside your test. Try and focus it on testing a single button, a single piece of text, a single title. It'll give you clearer results on that, and you can make clearer actions based upon that. And finally, this is a team sport. The reason why it's worked so well for us is we have the analytics team with Jen and myself and the user experience team. We've leaned on data scientists, designers, and many others. It really makes it a great experience, and cross-discipline is just the way to go. Now I'll pass it back to Jen.
Awesome. So I'm now going to talk about some or two examples of tests that we've done. To begin, I will mention that we optimize, so some of you may be familiar with it. If your optimized platform looks different, if you use like Optimizely, these screenshots may look a little different, but that's my disclaimer. So to begin, this is example one, a little bit about the test background. This was our pilot project, actually, really exciting. What we did was we have a heat mapping tool. For those of you who may not have heat mapping tools, it summarizes how users interact with page, where they click, where they move the mouse. Basically, it shows key user behaviors. So on the page, you can see it has like different colors that show you where people are clicking. In our particular case, on this You Have a Right page, we threw a heat map on it, and through that, it showed us that users were clicking on the icons that you can see circled in those red boxes, but those icons were not clickable. The main goal of this page was to direct users to those additional pages. So it was trying to get everybody, or the users that came to the page, to go to ask or to go to submit a complaint or buying a home paying for college. By not having those clickable, we lost a lot of user traffic to those pages potentially. The other thing that was great about this page and why we were really interested in running an A/B test on it is because this was a landing page for paid advertising. So there was a lot of traffic. As John just mentioned, it's really important to have traffic to pages in order to get good tests. So finally, this was a test that we kind of stirred up and brought to the product owners. Tests can come from multiple places. It could come from a product owner. In this case, it was actually something we were really interested in doing. When we brought it to the stakeholders, we found out they were kind of actually fighting and debating endlessly about whether making these icons clickable or not would be effective. So it was great marketing for us because we could say, hey, let's just run an A/B test and see which one actually works. Let's end this debate and find out the right way. So the test was running the variant, which had the clickable icons, and the hypothesis was more engagement. The clickable icons would create more engagement with other pages. So with that said, here were our results. It showed that clickable icons had a 21% improvement of our user activity. That's awesome. The original conversion rate was 7.5%, and we had 149 conversions, whereas our variant had a median conversion rate of 9.1% and 195 conversions. According to Optimize, this was actually not a clear leader, but because we set clear goals at the beginning, saying exactly what percent increase we wanted to see, we could tell that this was a winner indeed. Takeaways. Our clickable icons are usually winners. This was just something that we learned. People love clicking on icons. Providing the product owner with an option to create clickable icons was what we said to them. And in the end, they actually implemented this and created clickable icons for this page. So it was a huge success for our pilot project, and it only got us more excited and driven to keep going. So with that, I will present our second example. Again, to give you a little bit of background, this is a page that's part of our Planning for Retirement product. This is a tool that helps users think through what age to claim Social Security and how it will affect the amount of their benefits. The tool includes 3 steps, which you can see 2 of those steps here. I will explain. The first step is for users to enter their date of birth and highest annual income. Then once they've entered it, a sliding bar scale or sliding bar chart appears that shows estimated benefits based on their claiming age, what you see on the left. Step 2 was to answer lifestyle questions for further retirement tips, which you can see on the right. And then finally in step 3, users are asked to select a plan claiming age and learn next steps. So how they sign up on Social Security, whether they're collecting full benefits or not, things like that. So again, the test background here, this is actually something brought to us by the product owner. The product owner had run some client research, and what that said is lower percent of people who say they will claim immediately at age 6, the lowest claiming age, when given the pros of getting an increased benefit. We believe that providing the questions before the graph will have an impact on selected age. So the hypothesis was when lifestyle questions are presented to users before the estimated benefits interaction results, users will select a higher retirement age in step 3 because they have more facts to make an informed decision. So the test was, of course, to just swap those steps. So in step 1, we had the date, but for the variant, we swapped that to lifestyle questions. And then in step 2, the original, which was the lifestyle questions, for the variant, it became entering your date and getting that sliding bar scale. What were the results? Well, when we swapped the steps, we did not actually see users selecting a higher retirement age, which of course was our primary goal. But we had a secondary goal to see how users were actually interacting with those lifestyle buttons, and it showed that users answered all the lifestyle questions when they were presented first. This was a really important finding because it means the users are still becoming more informed. Once we presented this to the product owner, they were really interested in this because, of course, our whole site is really to inform users about decisions, and this was a great information. The takeaway, for better or worse, changing something as simple as step order can make a major impact on user behavior. As I was saying before, our predominant goal was to see higher age selected, but we learned that interacting with the tool was equally as important. When creating tests, you should monitor several behaviors and not just focus on the goal. Findings for secondary goals can be equally as important as the primary, like we found out in this test. This is also an example of how conversion rates over time clearly show where there is a winner. So as you can see, that variant and the original are completely separated. So it's very clear that the variant was attracting or having users select all the lifestyle questions much more than our original was. With that said, I just showed you an example of a clear winner. So I want to show you what maybe not a winner looks like. This is a good example that shows you why you should not expect a clear winner. So hopefully you can see that the variant at the very beginning was trending as the probability to be the best. Then in the middle of our test, it actually switched over and the variant came out on top. This also brings me to another point that John mentioned, is allow time to run your test. We ran this test for 56 days. Had we stopped after 2 weeks, we would have said the variant had the probability to be the best. But time showed us there was no clear winner in the end. So moving on, I will talk a little bit about our process now here at CFPB. To give you a general flow of how it goes, step one is we use analytics, we use heat maps, product owners come to us ideas, we have ideas, but we all come together to build a complete picture and understand what we actually want to test. From there, we run the A/B test. Step three is we conduct more research when needed, such as usability testing. And then step four, repeat. We love A/B testing, and we are constantly trying to run more tests, as John was saying, promoting this culture of research. So a little bit more about our process here at CFPB. First, it starts with a question. How do I increase email sign-ups? Will users click on X link if it's a button? Something like that. Then we have to really question what we're actually questioning. Is A/B testing right to answer that particular question? Are there other tools that could actually be used to answer the question? Or do the goals actually not make sense for an A/B test? An example of this is our marketing team came to us and they wanted to run an A/B test on a video. They had a brand new video that they wanted to put on this page and they wanted to see if they got more engagement. Well, the problem is the original page didn't have a video. So it really didn't make sense to test an A/B or to run an A/B test because those numbers just wouldn't line up. It was comparing apples to oranges. Finally, as I was saying, you could use other tools, or maybe there's just other methodologies, like is usability testing more appropriate for the question? If you've decided that A/B testing is right, our next step is always to go into discovery, sitting down with stakeholders and really understanding the hypothesis and goals and why we're running this A/B test. It's really important to involve the right people at this point to ensure not only that the test is possible, so in some cases our tests have required development help, so making sure that they have the bandwidth and we have the resources to get it done, but also making sure that PMO is included and user research if you need it, the whole crew. Again, as John was saying, this is a team sport and it really requires everyone to make a successful A/B test. From discovery, we move on to a formal planning session. And this is where we meet again and establish the hypothesis, goals, and timelines and really solidify them and nail them down. From planning, we move on to clearance. This is really important for our tests where we have content changes because, of course, we want to make sure that everything's right on paper and we're not showing users anything that wasn't cleared. Next, we move into our launch party. Woo! This is actually something really fun that we look forward to in every A/B test because we involve every stakeholder that we can. We launch the test through Optimize, and then everybody gets on their computer to go to the page and make sure that both variants are being seen, and more importantly, that we're catching any potential issues. So is there page flicker happening because of the A/B test? Is a tool potentially not working because of the A/B test? The launch party is really important to, again, to make sure that our A/B test is successful. Once we've once the test has been running and we have answers, we provide those answers to our stakeholders or product owners in a formal report. Finally, in the very end, we as a group all meet and have an internal meeting to discuss lessons learned and what we could do better in next tests. So this is our general process, but it is always evolving. Since the beginning, we have made such changes in our process, and I believe that we will always be making changes because we're constantly learning from each test. So one addition that we made to our process that wasn't there at the beginning was creating a client matrix. Our matrix outlines the page, variance, hypothesis and background, goal, whether dev support is needed, and more. It's basically our document that has all the information that we can look back on, and it's really important to us. It also is great because it lets us collaborate with all of our stakeholders. The last really important thing about our matrix is that it promotes transparency about goals and holds product owners accountable. So as John kind of mentioned, we don't want to test just for testing's sakes, and we want to make sure that the goals are really clear. So it's not okay to have a goal like clicks on X buttons increases user engagement. Really what we're looking for is clicks on X button increases user engagement by 5%. So we really work with our product owners to solidify those numbers so we know, is the goal appropriate and is it going to support next steps in implementation? Lastly, I'll talk about the goals. The primary goal, of course, is very important, and it should measure what you're trying to get from the hypothesis. Secondary goals are also really important, though, in documenting behaviors you want to see or making sure there's no negative impact. So we have some of our secondary goals are bounce rate, to make sure that bounce rate isn't increasing because of a variant, or time on page, to make sure that it's not getting longer or shorter depending on what the goal of the page actually is. Some other things to note is that product owner involvement can be as little as much as they like. We love when product owners are involved in every step of the process. Having enthusiastic product owners is what has allowed us to continue A/B testing and learning more. For tests that we have proposed, though, or product owners may not be as engaged. Their support, however, is allowing us to test, and it's just as important. What I'm trying to point out here is you can expect different stakeholders, and both are great learning opportunities. Be prepared for either. Testing is important, and again, it really helps to promote a culture of research, and that's why we are really invested in A/B testing. My next point is providing takeaways and options to product owners. What I mean by this is when we first started A/B testing, in our reports, we would provide results and recommendations to product owners. But this kind of instilled almost a sense of authority to us. We realized that our part and why we were A/B testing is to assist with research and to help guide decisions, not determine next steps. We were not the product owners, so knowing our role in place was very important and something that helped us create our process, evolve our process. The other thing that's really important, again, is including or at least informing the right people. We learned early on in A/B testing that it could be used against us, or it could be used for evil, rather. An example is that one of our product owners really wanted to test an email pop-up on their page to see if they could increase email signups. We thought this was a great idea, and we started planning, and we were super enthusiastic about it. We were ready to A/B test. Little did we know our design and development team had already turned down their idea because it conflicted with our design standards. We did end up testing the pop-up which did lead to increased signups. And that allowed the product owner to use our recommendation to push it to next steps. Let's just say we were kind of in hot water and our design and development team wasn't so happy with us. With that said, we learned a lot, and now we have a lot of transparency with our design and development teams. Product owners now have to submit an intake to be reviewed by our design and development team, and that just helps us because they can flag anything that we may not see in the planning process. So it's been great for us to, again, build our A/B testing services and to learn a lot more. And now I will pass it back off to John to present on after testing.
Thank you, Jen. So you run the test. Fantastic. What do you do afterwards? Well, as Jen said before, this really is kind of like a continuum of a process and something that we want to rinse and repeat and keep it rolling. So I think that there's a natural connection between the analytics team who work in quantitative information and the user research team looks into user behavior from a qualitative perspective. There are lots of projects that can basically be passed back and forth. An A/B test may show what people are doing, but it leaves out the why, and that can be a pass over to the qualitative team. Or the user research team can have a hypothesis about, I don't think this type of button will work because I've seen some research that people don't click on it, but we only maybe saw it in a small sample size, put it to A/B testing, put it in front of thousands of people, have more information. So often most shops, they have a silo between qualitative and quantitative work, or sometimes they only have one. But if you can have a combination of the two, have that nice sweet spot. A, it's a mutual learning opportunity. Everybody gets a lot out of it. But B, it really gives you the best data possible to make the best design decisions. And I just wanted to mention, you put all this hard work into doing these tests, getting all these results, and you'll give it to the stakeholder, and that works out really well. You provided your service, hooray. But I think a good organization has lots of knowledge management and has lots of information sharing, and the implications from that test can actually affect many products or even your global design for your web products. So I really encourage people when they do an A/B test or really any sort of research to really share that out even beyond the stakeholder team. People are interested in things about A/B testing. It still has that new feeling to it, and it's a very different type of research than other traditional projects. So you can often get a good crowd. You get a chance to educate people about the service and then possibly even gain more clients in the future. So really do try and take that extra step. I know it's when you're done with one project, you immediately want to start up the next one, but putting a little time aside to share that out can really pay dividends. And I want to talk a little bit about AA testing, which is not something that we were aware of at the beginning. As I mentioned before, A/B testing has been a very highly touted process for a while, part of this big data movement. A lot of hype behind it. Some people are saying, well, you can just chuck your whole user research team. All we need is just lots of A/B tests. And I think that we have learned that it is not true. A/B testing is just another tool that you can have in your arsenal. It's very powerful. It can do some things very well, but it shouldn't be considered to be a cure-all, and you should understand its limits and what it can and can't do. So I bring that up to sync you up with an article that I read called about AA testing, how I increased conversions by 300% by doing absolutely nothing. That's a pretty good headline. And it's actually a joking headline because it's saying I compared two of the same things, and one of them did a heck of a lot better than the other one. And that's not supposed to happen. So the hypothesis behind here is that these tools are harder to use than they think, and some people will use them and tout their results when they actually haven't done it correctly and they're pulling in bad data. So we said, okay, so rather than an A/B test where you run A against B, you take a single page and have 50% of the users look at it, another 50% of the users look at it, but then you compare those two, the metrics from the two groups, and you actually see what the behavior is doing. And ideally, it'll be 50 and 50 because it's the same people doing the same things on the same page. So we did this. We took one of our pages. We had the control being this learn more page. The variant was the exact same page. And we ran this AA test. And I guess you can see it as half of like a calibration of your tool to make sure that it's working correctly, but half a piece of making sure that you're using it correctly. So what did we find? Well, rather than the 50-50, excuse me, that we were hoping for, we saw that the B version was doing a heck of a lot better than the A version. And these are supposed to be the same. So this was very confusing for us. We weren't sure what went wrong. Is the tool busted? Have we been doing everything wrong the whole time? It was very concerning to us. But what it told us, and once we dug into it, we realized that A/B tests, as Jen said before, need to run for a long period of time. And it's almost like flipping coins. You know, there's a 50% chance of getting heads or tails. But if you only flip it twice and you get 2 heads, you can make an incorrect assumption that it always equals heads. So we started to understand that you need to have certain controls and expectations around your tests to make sure that your data is reliable. And this was a huge learning experience for us. So we found these are on the dashboard for the information that it gives you after running an A/B test. In the beginning, we pretty much just spent time in the middle here thinking that these were the 2 most important categories: which design has the highest probability to be the best, and which one, assuming you were running multiple tests, multiple variants, has the probability to beat the baseline, which is your control or your current design. But we actually found that it was much more interesting, this other information in these other 2 categories. For improvement, it's really understanding how much of a change is happening. This is showing that this one item had a change either 2% worse or 6% better. This is relatively small, but you wouldn't know that just by looking at 79%. You'd think, great, stop everything. We're in good shape. You feel very happy about that. The other pieces are over here on the right, looking at the conversion rates and the number of conversions. If this is a very small number, it means you haven't had a very large sample size, and it's probably unreliable in terms of data. But also here, these bar charts here, they show an overlap between this one and this one, which means that there's still a margin of error between the 2. So again, this is saying that there isn't enough time, enough time hasn't run to understand which one is actually better. And so it's giving you incomplete information that you should not be making decisions based upon that. So this is really, really helpful to us. So ultimately what we learned was that our internal controls, which are like our guidelines, were a great idea. We have a minimum to run any test for at least 2 weeks, if not longer. And we also have a fantastic tool that our data scientist created for us, but you can actually find a version of it online. If you search for A/B test calculator, there's a bunch of versions out there. And basically these calculators, you can input in what's the traffic for the pages that you're testing, what's the conversion rate that you're looking into, and it tells you about how long it may take for your test to run, which is really helpful. If it says it'll take 900 days, maybe not a good test to run. We've also found that before running a test, looking into the volume of traffic and the source helps you from running a bum test. Let's make sure that this is a good candidate for a test. And let's look at some of the sources of the traffic as well, making sure that they are the right sources and it's not, say, on part B, part of a paid, there's an advertising campaign going on. It's bringing on an entirely new different group of users. Is that something that will affect our tests in a negative way or a positive way? Something we should know. Also, let's actually staple down what conversion rate we want to be. Like as Jen said before, what's our goal? Let's figure out what that goal is. So if you run a test for a month and it says that one of the designs had a 1% better chance, is that enough for us to make a decision? Or do we feel that basically that's a wash? Or is any change welcome and we're willing to make those changes and possibly frustrate some users to get that win? Jen?
So I'm just going to recap some of the limits to A/B testing and what we've learned not to do or you can't do. 1, answer qualitative questions. Kind of John already mentioned this, but why are users clicking X over Y? That's not something we can necessarily answer in A/B testing. That's more of a user research question. A/B testing, again, can test how many clicks or if a user is spending longer on a page, but not why are they doing that. Involving your UX team, like our wonderful John, if you have one, or if you wear that hat, remember to ask yourself, is the question you're trying to answer a what is happening or a why is it happening? Other thing is to get definite results on, or you can't get definite results on a low traffic page. Again, this is something that John just talked about, but when we have low traffic, it's really hard to hit, or it's almost impossible to hit statistical significance. Remember that the point of an A/B test is to assist with research to help guide decisions. So don't provide bad data that could lead to changes that aren't helpful or worse, have a negative impact on users' experience. Lastly, understand outcome with no specific goal in mind. Again, we've mentioned this quite a few times during this presentation. Having a goal is really important. Each test needs a clear hypothesis and goal before running. Testing should not be used to force something on the page or to try and retroactively explain why a change needs to be there. So those were kind of just our final closing notes. Really want to thank DAP for letting us here at CFPB present on A/B testing, and thanks to everyone who's joined one or both of our presentations. If you've enjoyed this presentation, or if you're interested in learning more about A/B testing, we encourage you to join our A/B testing community. And Kelly and my email are right there. Please reach out to us with any questions, or if you are interested in joining our community. Thank you all so much again. And are there any questions?
Awesome. Well, that was great and very informative. Thank you very much. Okay, folks, if you have any final questions, please enter those now into the chat box, and we'll start going into these questions. So we do have a few from various people in the chat room. So let's jump in. So the first question that we got is, what tool do you use for creating heat maps?
So that's a great question. Originally here at CFPB, we were using a tool called Crazy Egg. With some updates to our website, we had to switch tools. So now we're actually using a tool called Mouseflow, which we love. Mouseflow. They show us heat maps for clicks. They also have heat maps for scrolling. So you can see how far down a page users are scrolling, where a page gets cold. In addition to that, we use Mouseflow for user recordings too, which is really exciting.
Awesome. That's great. So the next question that we got, in part one of this webcast, Kelly had mentioned to only run 2 variants on a single page. But we're curious about how many A/B tests you would typically run simultaneously across different pages.
If the pages have different traffic sources, there's really no limit to how many you can run. Certainly, if you're running a lot, that's more time that you need to spend analyzing the data, so think about that. But in terms of the number of variants, we found, if you have one variant, it's taking your user base and dividing it by 2. For every other variant you add, it's dividing it yet by another person, which means that it's shrinking the sample size, which means that the tests need to run longer. So if you have a page that has a huge amount of traffic, like tens of thousands or more, you can probably run multiple variants and it won't be a big deal. But it does create sometimes a more complex analysis and might just take longer in general. So for us, we found that just keeping it to an A and a B was our best practice.
Got it. That makes sense. Okay, next question we have. What advice do you have for convincing superiors that the effort and ROI of actually doing A/B tests is worth it? And did you by chance run into any kind of cultural challenges with convincing your superiors?
So it did take us about a year and a half to get this whole thing running. A lot of that piece was the procurement of the tool, but then we had to create ground rules and criteria for tests. There was interest in it, but there are also questions. And certainly you have to lay the groundwork for putting out items into the public that are perhaps not 100% finished, or the idea with experimentation with different types of drafts. So in some ways, if you've laid a groundwork by already doing other types of UX research and people are aware of it, they can see this as an extension of it, and that can make it a little bit easier to get your foot in the door. Certainly, if people aren't familiar with A/B testing, there's a lot of data on it. And if you have a data-driven organization and they're into the idea of metrics and analytics, this can be kind of the perfect piece to push in there. But I think sometimes the most helpful way of doing an A/B test is perhaps finding something that's innocuous that you can do, run it, find a clear winner, and then tout the heck out of that. Our pilot for the use of the tool had 2 different tests, and both had results that were very interesting. And so we spent a lot of time taking that on the road and, well, inside our building anyway, and giving lots of presentations and explaining the importance of the test. So I think evangelization is an important part of research and UX in general. There's stakeholder education that's always in play, but focus on what's already out there, focus on a good test case, and focus on the good work that you've already done to try and make your case for A/B testing.
Got it. Great answer. And our final question, do you supplement A/B testing with any type of surveys to help answer the why?
We haven't yet. I think there was one use case where we spoke to a client who, I think it was in our Office of Research. Remember when it was with Alicia, maybe? And I think the idea was to have an A/B test where you have the two versions, but then each of the forms would have, each of the pages would have some sort of open text field to collect information. So then you would have, in addition to the analytics that showed which one was better, you'd be getting some feedback from users of a more qualitative nature. I think that's what the person is asking. And we thought that was a very interesting idea. We never got around to doing it, but I'd love to hear examples of people who had. I think that's like a nice evolution. If you already have an A/B testing practice and you want to bring it to the next level, I think that sounds like a good next step.
Awesome. Okay, well, those are all the questions that we have for today. Just wanted to thank the team again. That was an awesome presentation. Okay, folks, well, that concludes today's webinar. We would really appreciate you filling out the survey that we're going to link to in our YouTube chat. We'll also be sending that your way in an email after today's webcast, so we'd really appreciate any feedback that you might have. And as always, please feel free to reach out to the team here with any questions. Definitely feel free to if you have any more questions or need more information, contact the folks on the slide in front of you right now. And thank you again for attending today's webcast.
Thanks.
Thanks, everybody.